Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is an open meeting of the Needham Finance Committee. I'm Joshua Levy, Committee Chair. Today is Wednesday, March 9th, 2022, and the meeting is being conducted in a hybrid manner consistent with current state regulations and is being recorded. Public access to this meeting does not ensure that there will be public participation unless the law requires it. This meeting will not have public comment except in connection with the first item of business, citizen request to address the Finance Committee. First, I'll confirm that a quorum of the members of the Finance Committee are present. When I call your name, please acknowledge your presence. John Connolly.
Here.
Barry Kaufman.
Here.
Jim Healy.
Here.
Tom Jacob.
Here.
Rick Lunetta.
Here.
Louise Miller.
Here.
Dick Riley.
Here.
And the
There.
chair.
There. So long as you're not everywhere, we're good.
And the chair is here. As a reminder, anything you share or state will be a matter of public record. We'll come to the first item, citizen request to address the Finance Committee. If there's anyone in the room or attending online, please raise your hand. I don't see anyone in the room or online, so we can move to the next item of business. And Carol Fischetti is here.
Here.
Good, okay. So the next item is approval of the minutes of February 16th, 2022. Any comments?
No comments, I will accept this.
Okay.
Second.
Any discussion? We'll come to a vote. Louise,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Barry. Yes. And the chair votes yes.
And I vote yes as
Get
well.
Dick?
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Dick.
Yeah, it's all right.
Because you're there, not here.
So just start at the.
Apparently I
end.
need to be, apparently I need to be everywhere.
Okay, so the next item of business, we're talking about annual town meeting warrant articles. Since we have a, yes,
Relative to that, you have a current draft of the warrant. A couple of things, there are a couple of errors in the warrant. They're not topics you're taking up tonight and they'll probably be resolved when you take them up. But the Article 29 appropriates the Emery Rover renovation. Although I'm sure people wish that the total cost was 13.4. That's the general fund share. It should actually be reading 19.4.
Okay.
And the second thing under the Article 31, the cash capital. There, the school master plan financing and scheduling options should not be there. That wasn't recommended by the town manager. So that won't appear in the version of the warrant going to town meeting in the next edition. And the amount of free cash amount will drop to $3,116,314.
perfect. Are those all the clarifications?
Those are the two clarifications. The last thing that I would ask the committee do, that when it makes motions and references, that although there are article numbers appearing, I would ask that you make reference to the subject matter as well. The article numbers will likely change by the time it's the version that will be going to town meeting.
I think that's doable. We can do that. Thank you. Perfect. So before we get into this, since we have a very full meeting, I'm thinking if we don't finish all of the articles that are on the agenda, that when it hits 8, we just move to the other items. And if we want to come back to other articles on the agenda afterwards, I'm happy to do that. So the first,
Or not.
yes, it's an option. So the first article on the agenda is 47. Adopt MGL increase in contribution retirement COLA allowance.
Which is something that we have done in the past. We
Yeah.
did this once before.
Evan, did you want to speak to this?
I mean, I'm going basically to answer any questions, but I just want to make everyone aware that although the retirement board may issue a 3% COLA every year, everyone doesn't get a 3% because there's a base. And that's a way at least to increase that base from 14,000 to 16. So everyone would get, instead of getting $420 a year, they would get $480. So that's basically what we're doing. So I just want everybody to be able to get a little bit more of an increase. especially-
Move to
So-
adopt the increase in contributory retirement COLA allowance.
And if I may,
Bless you.
I'm gonna second it. And then if I may, so what that means is that those who are in the lowest income level, pension level, are the ones who benefit from this, not others.
There's a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Okay, we come to a vote. Dick,
Yes,
Keith,
Yes,
Rick,
Yes.
Jim, Tom,
Yes.
Carol,
yes.
John,
Yes.
Terry,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. The next article is unpaid bills of prior year. It's listed as Article 14. Oh, I skipped one. You're right. I'm sorry. Article 9, property tax assistance program.
This is the same thing that we've done every year.
Every year.
Yeah.
Any reason not to do it? Motion to approve appropriate but Needham property tax assistance program.
Second.
Oh, okay, thank you. Evelyn, did you have a comment about that?
Oh, say something anyway.
I'd like to take the liberty of reading one letter that we
Mhm.
received.
Sure.
One of the people who received that, and I get a lot of these letters. I just wanted to pick this one. It says, Dear Evelyn, I can't begin to thank you for your kindness in approving the funds to help offset my real estate tax bill again this year. I'm sure you do, in capital letters, know what welcome assistance it is, but I'd still like to express my undying gratitude for your attention to my difficult situation. Very happy also that the pandemic seems to be winding down, and I hope this finds you getting back to normal as anyone can expect. Thanks to you so much again for your generous help. So, I mean, it's just an example of people appreciate, what the town is doing. I just wanted to just give you that little bit.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for reading that. Yeah, Louise.
Are we getting contributions, voluntary contributions, still gift donations?
The contributions this year were 22,000.
Great.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
much higher than.
That's much
Yeah.
higher
Yeah.
than it has been, yeah.
That's good.
And now we have to encourage the people to apply. We're
Yeah.
still working on getting more applicants.
That's great.
But yeah.
What, do we know what other towns do to, I mean, whether it's something like this or a different type of program? I was actually talking to someone who had an interesting thought, but I won't discuss it now. But I mean, anyway, to address the tax, allowing people to stay in their homes by trying to mitigate some of their tax burden.
I don't know.
I'm just curious.
Could give them a tip.
Funded from the same source, overlay surplus.
You're a nasty man.
I'm just, I just, given what's gone on and that, I think being creative with this to the extent possible is something we should think about.
I agree with that. This was a
Social
topic
government.
literally for 15 years. And the town has, wrestled with how can they address the issue? What is it that they can do? If you remember, in the 1990s and early 2000s, the dot-com, business, kind of basically floundered. And there are a lot of people in this town that had bought mega mansions and they no longer could afford all of the debt that they had taken on. So it wasn't just what a lot of people think it's just one particular segment of the community. And actually, at that time, was a much broader based. And so this came out of that. This whole concept came out of it, and the ability to make the contributions came out of that. I'm not sure. I don't know of any other mechanism, but this seems to work, I think, very well.
Mr. Chair, I have just one question. There's $50,000 here. Have you received more requests than you had money for?
No. Everybody gets something. Last year was a hard year to judge things by because of the pandemic and everything that was going on. People weren't able to get applications because most of these people are in their 70s to 90s. We have a couple of 100-year-olds.
Okay.
And they weren't able to get access to the applications, although we mailed them out. I mean, so it was difficult. So this year we had about 28 applicants, only awarded 18 because of some of them had too many assets, but we're trying to encourage
Gotcha.
more, but everybody gets something, and we do distribute the whole thing.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but last year, or the year before, there was a group that came here who were working on trying to market that program and increase those who would apply for it. Has their work stopped, or are they still going at it?
We tried, we gave things out, and we're gonna do that again this year. With traveling meals programs and have them available throughout the town
Yeah.
and the library, and now that things are starting to open up again, I think we're gonna see more applicants. I really do. Because the word has gotten out.
Dick, did you have anything you want to add? I wasn't sure if you raised your hand.
Me, no.
Okay, anyone else? Have any comments?
I was second Mr. Healy's motion.
Okay, I think Louise had.
Oh,
No.
I think it was Rick, maybe,
Okay.
Lynetta.
Okay.
Anyway.
Nobody wants it now.
Okay, whatever. So we have a motion and a second. We'll take the roll. Dick,
Yes,
is
Yes,
Rick,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Gary,
yes.
and the chair votes yes. Next article is unpaid bills of prior year. This is Article 14.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is a bill from last year, fiscal 2021. It's the annual fee that the state charges the town for doing the weights and measures work. At one time, the town used to have an employee that did that work. And when that employee opted to retire, it was one of the many types of positions that's difficult to fill. And the Commonwealth was offering this service, and this is the fee that that we pay. Fiscal 2021, a combination of the state not getting the bills out on time and changeover in staff in the building department, and quite frankly, COVID-19, it was missed and the funds weren't reserved to pay the bill. So we're not able to pay the bill until we get an appropriation to do so.
Two questions. Do you require, since this is now kind of a claim outside of the fiscal year, do you require that there be any type of a settlement agreement or any type of a, accord and satisfaction?
When we get bills from vendors that it's somewhat unreasonable to assume that we can go that long without knowing the bill and paying it, we negotiate, and sometimes they go away, sometimes they stick to their guns. Bills from the Commonwealth, we don't have a choice. They'll just put them hands in the town's coffers and take the money if we don't pay it. So we really don't have a choice on this particular one, but yes, we do try to negotiate. If it's something that was clearly at our fault, meaning that we had the bill and we forgot to pay the bill, we don't really have much ground to stand
Right.
on.
Right. And the second question is, how did this figure compare to what we had previously spent for the same service in-house?
It's a flat fee. It's 12,000
yeah,
each year.
it's the same fee.
Okay. So
It's
I
in the
would,
building department. That's.
but it was a part-time position, it was a half-time position, right?
Oh, yes, and we are nowhere near the cost of
Yeah,
what it
it's
used to
much
be
less.
with the part-time employee that did.
I think that was the question.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying. I would make a motion that we adopt the appropriation for payment of unpaid bills of prior years.
Is there a second? Second. Any other discussion? We'll vote. Dick,
Yes,
Louise,
Yes,
Rick,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Gary,
Yes,
and the chair votes yes.
so this is a good example of saving money through outsourcing.
And the government actually helping us.
What else can we outsource?
So
Just a
next
thought.
article is Article 16, appropriate for fiscal year 2023 sewer enterprise fund budget. And I would just note, in line 201B, expenses is going up a lot. I believe that's due to the NIPD's program costs. Is that correct?
Yes, the narrative, when I write that, will indicate that it's the reflection of the 195,000 that used to be appropriated in the financial warrant article, and that will be explained. As I said in the narrative, The amounts that you see here is reflective of the updated assessment numbers from the MWRA and the inclusion of the 195,000. It is as the committee and the liaison to the enterprise funds work with.
Perfect, thank you. Any questions or comments?
I make a motion to appropriate the FY 23 sewer enterprise fund budget,
Second,
And that's in the amount of 9 million.
$9,369,072.
Second,
second,
further discussion? We'll vote. Dick,
yes,
Reese,
yes,
Rick,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. Next article is the fiscal year 2023 water enterprise fund budget, currently shown as Article 17.
Share the same comment. The only thing that's different about this than what the budget that you were working with during the budget review is this is reflective of the MWRA actual assessment for fiscal 23, which is lower than FY 22.
their projected assessment. They reserve the right to change it.
Yes, they do, but not
I'm not with the MWRA anymore,
but not above that number.
but.
Is that in the fall when they do that?
No, they'll do that.
Once the
in-
budget, state budget's adopted, and then they all have a trade.
Yeah.
But in the old days, didn't we used to rectify that or reconcile that, excuse me, in the fall?
Yes, if, because usually we won't know until after town meeting acted, so we would adjust them in the fall.
Okay.
So it's maybe a dumb question. Why is sewer assessment higher year over year and the water assessment lower?
That's not a dumb question, but it's because that's the rate. Sewers, that's where they, right? Sewer is where they measure everything,
Okay.
right? At the end of the pipe.
Yes, that's one factor.
And then once they find out what the outflow is, it's based on that, the water rate, or not the water, but the water amount is based, isn't
Yeah,
that?
the
Am I right?
water amount is based upon
Ooh,
our
I'm glad I remember that.
our water amount is based upon our actual usage in the previous calendar year, and our usage of MWRA water
Right.
last year declined,
and
even though the rate per million gallons.
Right,
went up.
in this, but the sewer.
So-
So we use less water from the under rate, but we're, in the sewer is,
So different calculation for sewer. It's not based on how much you use.
okay.
It's
that's
also
the
based
answer.
on population. It's based on population density. So it's a different
Okay, so
formula.
it's not an actual,
No, it's not
usage.
1-to-1.
right,
Mm-mm,
okay,
mm-mm.
but the water is what we
Water,
actually.
water is just what you
Water
pump.
goes through a meter. so
Right,
they
right.
Use the sewer as.
Is
Louise
metered
mentioned.
plus.
Well, because of
It would-
infiltration and inflow, correct? The INI?
That will help contribute to the local cost, because what happens is they have a device that measures the flow at the start of the town when it's coming from the other community, and a meter that measures the flow as it exits the community, and the difference is your contribution. And in terms of determining what your flow of the sewage is. Now, if you have
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
I don't need to see it.
that adds groundwater.
Use
the
restroom in the restaurant out of town.
Porta potties. Porta potties.
Yes, you want to use
Put it on the
use
website.
the restaurants in Newton.
Newton,
Yeah,
yeah.
I make a motion to appropriate the FY 23 water enterprise fund budget in the amount of $5,643,063.
I'll second.
Any discussion? We'll vote. Dick,
yes,
Reese,
Yes,
Rick,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
John, Barry,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. Next is setting the annual limits for revolving funds, shown as Article 19.
Mr. Chair, these are the same limits as the prior year. There's nothing changing with any of the revolving funds. And it just requires, if the law was amended, I truly don't see how it did anything different for the community. It used to be that you would have to authorize the accounts and the spending limits. Well, the accounts are authorized by bylaw now, and the town meeting approved these revolving funds by bylaw, but the spending limits voted annually. And as said, nothing's different about them. If there was something new, in other words, a new revolving fund, that would be a standalone article because it would be new and it'd have to be a bylaw change. And the second thing is if there was a proposal to change the amount of the spending limit, we would have that as a standalone because changes tend to have more conversation than the continuation.
So that means none of these have changed from last year.
None of them have changed.
We had composting, huh? Last year. Yes.
In reference to the program that we spoke about, in terms of youth services program, is that,
No,
That's
the
completely
program,
different?
that's Park and Recreation, that comes under a different statute that was adopted in the 70s. And
okay,
it runs different, it doesn't require any vote of town meeting because the fact is that truly is participation driven.
gotcha. Thank you.
And the composting is the bins. That's why it's so little.
Yes,
Yeah.
the actual compost is a general fund receipt.
So a question, are any of these limits, were they higher last year due to any COVID related issues? And should they actually have been lower this year versus last year? Are there any COVID impacts that?
No, they're all the same limits as last year and the year before. None of these limits have changed in
Thousands of years. But I do want to follow up on Carol's question, which is, can we ever get what the actual amount is that was spent?
Sure, I provide that to you always every year in a memo before town meetings, so you have the walking around information.
Well, the only reason I bring it up is because I had some familiarity with Memorial Park trustees. And I'm not sure.
There's no activity.
Yeah, what is that
Now,
spent
wait a
on?
minute, there's activity, it's just no activity here.
That's the,
Right, so why does Memorial Park trustee need a revolving fund?
it's the liquor, right? Into the liquor bill?
No,
No?
so it all started with the need to have hot dogs. And so they used to run the concession stand. And so the monies that came in from the football games, lacrosse and soccer games could be used for purposes of helping refurbish Memorial Park. But that's now been taken over by the Touchdown Club. And so it really, they
They're
don't,
not buying hot dogs at Memorial Park.
not
trustees.
buying them, not cooking them, not eating them. So, but that's why I raised it. At some point, I'm not, I don't know if we need to do it, in March of 2022, but it probably, at some point, we should revisit it. In other words, which of these is really active, which one isn't, and, what type of recommendations might we make? That being said, I would like to vote to recommend that we adopt the set the annual department revolving fund spending limits as stated in the warrant.
Further discussion?
I have
Go
a
ahead.
question. Public facility use, the DPU, what's DPW rather, what's that all about? What's the source of the funds?
Those are the fees people pay to rent the spaces in town buildings or,
And it's that amount, that much, $250,000?
yes, because there's the custodian fees. They
No,
pay,
I'm just, people are paying that much?
There's that much activity.
Oh, no, we're not at that level, but we like to have the level higher because the quirk in the law is, let's say you paid $300,000 to provide services. We're not allowed to provide you any more than 250. And the money has to stay. We can't give it back either.
But what's the source of the funding for it then? Fees that have been paid in the past?
The funding is the fees that the person pays at the time of service. Think of it as a true retail
Okay.
transaction.
That's where I see the disconnect. The
Yes, there's-
disconnect. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be talking over you, but my problem is how do we get up to the amount of 250,000 if it's not that much use?
Those are the amounts that we estimated is if there was a full participation of renting all the facilities. It's an estimate that we came up with when the fund was adopted. And it has been working. These are not dollars that you're appropriating. What you're saying is, what's the maximum amount that can be spent from the fund when it raises the funds for the services that it's providing.
I guess what they're saying, Dick, is they want to make sure they have enough. They have enough capacity.
Yeah,
In the event-
I sort of understand that, but it just strikes me odd is that we would put a number in there that isn't anything to do with reality, but so be it.
Well, it's,
Well, it is in the hundreds of thousands. It's
Is
just
it?
not-
Okay.
So maybe that would help. So
Yeah.
if we could get what the actual usage is,
Yeah.
that would be.
Exactly.
Like 3 years ago.
Yes, because the last few years wouldn't be,
Yeah.
because it was low.
And well, then out of left field question, why aren't they all very high? What's the risk of them being too high?
Well,
What should we be looking at as part of our responsibility on what the limit should be?
There used to be a statutory limit at the maximum amount of all the revolving funds together could be. So you certainly didn't want to tie up capacity on the Memorial Park trustees. You didn't want to make that $200,000 if they have $3,000 worth of activity, because there was a maximum ceiling that a town could adopt for these revolving funds. That actually has changed since that has changed with the Municipal Modernization Act. That's not a problem. We've just never gone back and adjusted any of or relooked at what the limits are on any of these funds.
But I would say there is a risk. The risk is that they may think of other things to do
Yeah.
that may not necessarily be what we want to be done within the revolving fund. And so I think we should know the purposes for which the funds are expected to be used and what the amounts are. I think that's a legitimate inquiry.
So that's a reason to have a reasonable limit.
Yes.
right.
Or in the case of it's not being done at all, why are we
Right.
approving it? It doesn't-
Right.
Okay, further discussion? We'll come to the vote. Dick,
Yes,
Reese,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes,
Tom,
Yes.
Cheryl,
Yes,
John,
Yes.
Barry,
yes.
and the chair votes yes. Next article is the SIMS debt authorization, that is Article 37.
And Mr. Chairman, we don't have anything yet. There will be something by the time we get to the version of the warrant that goes to town meeting. I'm in the process of putting together with the town treasurer a debt structure and the updating and confirming with the project managers whether projects closed or not, specifically PVPC. Any of those projects can be closed.
I had a question, well, so I noticed on the warrants, there's another article about a boat launch. And I understand that there was some debt authorized for that at one point.
No debt. That was always cash.
I thought there was about $50,000 authorized.
Yeah, that was not debt, that was cash.
Okay.
And that was appropriated and the project did not move for a number of years, but it's now designed and now the 285,000 is the construction estimate.
Any further comments?
Controversial articles, I think we should wait.
I don't think we can really do anything else. Thank you. So we can move on to the next article, 39, athletic facility improvement funds.
The chair, this is the athletic facility improvement fund, which we set funds aside for most notably replacement of the carpets at the fields, and we put monies aside for other athletic facility improvements that were known. The amount that's being appropriated is the amount that the Park and Recreation generates and turns into the general fund, and it's based on a 5-year average, which is now $33,533.
I make a motion that we appropriate to the athletic facility improvement fund.
A second.
Barry, can you comment?
Question, so we kind of know or have an idea of what the cost is gonna be 12 years out. Is there a reason why we don't do this on a more straight line basis? I mean, last year we actually did make a meaningful appropriation, right? To the
Well, we
fund.
returned funds that were not spent that were appropriated from the fund.
We had appropriated like $2.5 million, but only spent like 1.8 year.
Oh, okay, that was what that number referred to. But is there a reason then, if we know we're gonna spend $3 million in 12 years, why we don't amortize it 250 a year?
Well, this is the money that the Park and Recreation is generating that we're appropriating. When
Okay.
other funds become available and recommended, we do recommend that.
And that could be the case this year with something called free cash.
I've heard of that.
So,
So there could be some need for that in other
Okay.
pockets.
That's the answer, I get it.
That's-
Go ahead. Louise.
so I would not be in favor of voting this today because for exactly that reason, that there may be other funds that we would recommend.
In that case, would it end up going through, it couldn't go through another article, it would have to go into.
It would have to go into this article. We would
We
end up
just changed the source.
Yeah, we just changed the
Yeah.
amount.
the amount, right,
Well,
And
and the source, because this source is a tax levy.
right, right,
Right.
right.
Could we vote contingent on if that does occur, then just change it?
So once this goes to print, that is what is printed in the warrant. And then we have to amend it. And I think it was a little bit of a disaster when we tried to amend an article at a town meeting before.
I suspect though there'd be less emotion on this than it might have been on the referee.
Maybe,
Just a small little bit.
there may be, but I think that we should, my own view is that we should withhold voting until we know what we want to vote into this. I'm just one,
I have no
One
objection to
person.
that.
No, this is a rush
Okay.
to get done.
Yeah.
I will be
Okay.
happy to withdraw my motion.
But Dave, will we have those numbers available before the warrant is printed?
Which numbers?
If we want to
If we-
appropriate more to
If
the
we're
side.
gonna appropriate more.
If the number goes up.
We
we're
already
already
Well,
have,
getting
do we
it
know what
more.
it is?
That's coming from you all, so I
Yes.
don't know what your number is.
so
Right.
we already have the amounts available in terms of free cash, if that is the source that we want to use. But I think my understanding is we need to figure out the budget, for instance, how much we're about a free cash we're allocating for
Right.
budget. So if we want to come back to this after we vote the budget, that might be the best time to do it.
Makes sense.
I think that does make sense.
Okay.
We should have a comprehensive discussion of what to do with free cash, which I understand is going to be substantial.
So,
I like the word comprehensive.
okay, so we'll hold off on that and perhaps come back to it this evening. The next article is Article 40, Workers' Compensation Reserve.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there are two ways that we fund our workers' compensation related expenses. One is the annual appropriation that the town makes to the workers' compensation fund. And the second is what happens is funds that not are expended are reserved to meet future expenses that are associated with workers' comp claims from the past. We also, we have stop loss insurance for workers' comp claims that are exceptionally large. The stop loss insurance limits are, there's a individual limit of that our coverage provides that losses be for a single individual in a single accident of a cost of more than $500,000. Once we hit that level of expenses, then insurance covers all the expenses beyond that. We have an individual accident claim of $1 million. So any one accident that results in costs. And remember, this is the life of the incident. And that could go on for years. For instance, we have a long-term claim that resulted because of air quality issues from the 1990s at the Pollitt School. There are still claims being paid to the employee that was affected. But because those that cost is well exceeded the individual claim, the insurance pays that every single year. So that's not even on our books anymore. So we have $1 million aggregate that any one incident or accident, the town pays no more than $1 million over the whole life of related cost to that. And then there's a third level of claims, and that's $3 million that when total cost associated in any one policy year exceeds $3 million, then stop loss
Stop loss
insurance,
kicks in.
but again, over the life of those related claims. It's more the mid-level claims and stuff that we build up a reserve, and ideally, we'd like to have a balance of $1.2 million in the reserve to address those expenses. At the end of fiscal 2021, June 30th, which is the date that I look at, and is easy to verify because it's in the audited documents and stuff. The town had a balance out in the fund of $1,025,000. I'm sorry, $1,054,000, and 130,000 would get us up to the 1.2 million. I can't read my own writing. It's 1,084,000.
Okay. So this would fully fund it, but
It'd be
They're
today.
Going up every time you speak.
but next year, presumably there would be drawdowns from this fund next year. So there-
Yes, and I we keep looking at it.
So all of
The
those
other-
limits are SIIs, they're all
Yes.
self-insured, really?
Yes, yep.
Even for comp?
Everything for workers' compensation, nothing for the injured on duty.
Okay.
We have no policies
Okay.
on that.
I make a motion to vote in favor to appropriate to workers' compensation fund in the amount stated in the warrant.
A second.
Further discussion?
From the source stated.
Yes, this is from free cash. We'll come to the vote then. Dick,
Yes,
please.
Yes,
Rick,
Yes.
Yes.
Jim, Tom,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes.
Out of the four corners question, where does one go find what the stop loss premiums are and where are they?
I can tell you that, email you what we paid this year. So it's about 150,000, 160,000.
Okay, thank you.
Next article is 41, showing this 41, Public Safety Injury Indemnity Funds.
Ditto, this is a new fund specific for the same purposes for injured on duty claims. And as the committee is aware, we split out workers' compensation from injured on duty. Now works similar. The issue was that the injured on duty could not be paid out of the workers' comp fund because it did not cover under the workers' comp law. So that's why once we saw this mechanism available, we asked the town to adopt the local option, and now this is the piece.
So where was injured on duty paid? Or how was injured on duty? paid?
Well, we were paying it from the annual appropriation, and but the back cost, we're also getting paid from the annual appropriation because we couldn't use the fund,
Which line item was it funded to? I guess. I'm
the
asking.
workers' compensation.
Oh,
It
okay.
used to be called workers' compensation and injured on duty. Now we have them two separate lines, workers' compensation and injured on duty.
Okay.
And that's the townwide expenses.
so I have a question. So someone is injured and is either out on workers' comp or injured on duty. So for a while, we don't replace that person. At what point do you actually replace the person so that you need to start dipping into one of these funds?
These actually are not paying the
They're just paying
the lost
medical
wages.
costs?
This is medical and legal.
Oh, where the lost wages come from?
They come out of the
The operating
operating budget.
It's just like a non-occupational sick leave.
Okay.
If I'm sick today, it's still the same appropriation paying my sick time versus my.
So
work
what is the
time.
goal on this fund?
We're working with a third-party provider to an appropriate way to measure it, but I anticipated it will be close to $1 million because of my understanding is there are no insurance carriers underwriting injured on duty. I am.
They would be foolish.
So since this is new, do you have any balance at this point?
There's zero. This would be the
This
first
is
time.
brand new.
Got it,
This is
thank you.
brand new.
Dick, go ahead.
yeah, Dave, I think it would be helpful if I don't have any problem with this amount, but if we had some statistics of what's been paid or how we arrived at the $1 million figure.
And same with the workers' comp, I think would be helpful.
The
Workers' comp is easy.
You
yeah,
got it.
it's
So we
easier.
know that
Yeah.
our uninsured liability is estimated by the third-party provider
Mhm.
for those claims that happened prior to 2021 of 1,025,000.
Okay.
So, and yes, Dick, that's one of the things that I am working on for this year. So by budget time next year,
Fine.
at those kind of data points.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion to approve and appropriate to public safety injury on duty fund.
I'll second.
Further discussion? We'll vote. Dick?
Yes,
Please.
Yes,
Rick?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Barry?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So now we get to the TIF forbearance agreement. Just as background, this was on the select board's consent agenda for last night, but my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, they did not move it. They did not take action on it.
They did not take action on it last night. They pulled it and they'll take it up at a future meeting.
Okay. So I guess I had some questions and perhaps other members of the committee have some questions about the financial impact, the revenue impact in particular of that agreement. And I'll open it up for anyone else to ask questions as well.
The revenue impact, the value of the TIF for TripAdvisors for fiscal 21. It's a deferral of 1% of the new growth value, which was approximately $18,000 for FY 21 and a similar amount for FY 22, approximately $18,000.
But this agreement would cover fiscal years 22 and 23, correct?
I believe it says 21 and
no,
22.
it says 22 and 23.
23.
But we would presume there's some.
Well, it's, anyways, the TIF continues and it's just a 1% credit for the remaining life of the TIF. So I would presume 23, then if that would be about a comparable amount. So it's about $18,000 in taxes that they're not paying that without the TIF. In theory, they would have been paying.
And since they're not in compliance with the agreement, they should have to pay the extra 18,000.
It's
All else being equal without. this-
Right.
yes,
assuming
yes.
it's-
If the TIF was no longer in force, they would have to be paying. They would not get the credit. They would also have the right, however, to apply for an abatement. The TIF prevents them from applying for abatements, and I think folks understand what happened to the commercial market last year. Their vacancy rate.
So why would they have a right to apply for an abatement?
If the TIF is not in place,
Well, no, the TIF is in place. They go down to 0%. So now they owe $18,000.
Go ahead.
no, if the TIF, it doesn't go down to 0 and the TIF, if the TIF is in place, they can't file an abatement
Mhm.
and they get a credit of 1%. If they do not get the credit, the TIF has been voided.
That's not what the TIF says.
So, well, I have to defer to legal counsel on that.
Okay, that is not what the TIF says.
Yeah.
And I also have some question about what this forbearance is. What is the Board of Selectmen forbearing from doing?
They're agreeing to not have the agreement voided as a result of them not having the physical presence of the employees that the TIF agreement says they have to have.
So I guess my question is, what is the purpose of, mean, that's the 700 employees that was in the original agreement. I think that was kind of that was negotiated. That was
Mhm.
something that was in the town's
Correct.
interest. So what is in the town's, why is it in the town's interest to negate that clause that was previously in the town's interest?
The town did not, the town needed to negotiate the TIF that looked at employee counts, but that wasn't the primary driver to the agreement. But the TIF requires that they have that number of employees, and they would have had that number of employees on the site if it wasn't for the government order, basically shutdowns, that they physically could not be in the building. See, that's the difficulty. It's not that they don't have the employees, they're not in the facility, and therefore they can't count them. This is something that most every TIF agreement in the Commonwealth is probably looking at. Edam seems to be one of the few towns that's actually, oh, they're obviously not in compliance. We need to address this somehow in writing. I have not seen this in some of the other towns that have TIFs, but I cannot believe, like TJX and Natick, that was empty, that somehow they were sneaking all the employees to have their employment numbers met to qualify for their TIF. And in terms of reaching out to the Commonwealth, if there's dead silence in terms of how to handle this. So this was the mechanism that the legal counsel had advised, and which TripAdvisor's legal counsel thought that would work to both sides, that it would be memorialized. It's understood that both parties are recognizing that the TIF is still in place, and it's agreed for other consideration that they still got the value of that 1% in 21 and in 22.
Do we know if TripAdvisor was a recipient of the PPP program?
I do not know.
It was
Okay.
also not 22 and 23. This is what this agreement is, 22 and 23. The shutdown was in fiscal year 21, and it ended really quickly. So,
But not for but in fairness to TripAdvisor, not for their employees, because they're all working from home. So they're not.
that was their
Well,
choice.
most of that was their choice.
That was their choice.
For well after.
Yeah,
last
that was
summer.
their choice. And I still don't understand. So for me, and this is just putting, I mean, I now have a lawyer hat on. I don't understand this forbearance at all. I don't understand what they're forbearing from. I don't understand what we're forbearing from. And then they're giving us a different consideration.
Yeah.
That's not even related to the TIP.
Dick, go ahead.
Yeah, if they had how would this be different if in fact there were 700 employees in there? What's
If they
the
had,
economic impact of the town, and
Oh.
why,
You know,
if they're not there, why are we changing things? That's what basically, it's a different way of coming at Louise's question.
If they were there, they'd be
milling around.
milling around the town, spending money,
Yeah.
giving us tax revenue.
But in terms of so that's, I guess, the tax basis, but I'm having trouble understanding why that
Supporting our
we should
business.
forbear on the provision. It seems to me we need to see what the economic impact on TripAdvisors is. And that
But
there
it
is no
also-
mention made, I understand the business is not going well, but shouldn't we be having some financial information about TripAdvisor so that we understand whether or not it's reasonable to give them a pass on the real estate taxes?
again, let's not forget that if we said, okay, the agreement's void,
But why would it
It's
be
18.
void? Why would it be void? I think that's,
because they didn't satisfy the terms and conditions.
That doesn't
of
make
the
it
agreement.
void.
That means we can enforce,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a breach
it
of the
doesn't
contract.
void it.
I agree.
No, but it's a
It
breach
says
of.
we can reduce their exemption to 0. And so I don't see that we've been given the factual information to make an irrational decision on that.
And they're also providing, so, I mean, if really it's only worth $17,000 or $18,000, they're paying more than that in a scholarship
Well,
fund.
for 2 years, though.
It's 2 years, so it's
So
like
it's
18
36.
versus
36
25.
versus 25, but I still agree with you.
Oh, it's the
Louise.
same thing.
No, I agree
mean,
with you. I mean, I don't understand if it,
I don't understand
I
this at
can't
all.
believe a company is really worried about $11,000. 36 in taxes versus 25 for a scholarship,
Right.
and then having a speakers program, which I'm interested in that.
Does it,
So-
does a breach of a TIF agreement flow through like bank loan covenants at all? Like, are there any implications on their other financial instruments?
I do not know that. I do
And-
not know that.
So the other thing that I found
Would have
interesting
to
is the
be.
one
That
thing
would
that
be
I thought they
why.
would care about is their status. That economic, that advantage, that's what I would think they would care about with the state. And
If they don't have a TIF with the town, they can't have a TIF with the state.
correct, but we didn't forbear from,
What tip do they get with the state?
they get special privileges with the state. They get special tax things with the state.
And as I
That's
said,
what that EAC or EACC, whatever that acronym was in there, that's what that is.
Okay.
It's like an economic development
Front of the line or the
agency
cafeteria?
with
What,
the state.
And the state's been silent. They've given no guidance or any, they've said nothing to anybody.
No, interesting.
Can I back up to sort of the genesis
Mm-hmm.
of all this and what role we play or don't play? And apparently it seems like the intention was we don't play a role in this, because the only way we found out about it was Josh was looking at a
Consent
an
agenda.
agenda and it was gonna be acted on as a matter of consent. So, but for that diligence of Joshua, we never would have known about this. And so why is that? And if the TIF was originally approved by town meeting, wouldn't any amendment to the TIF need to be approved by town meeting as well? So I wrestle with that before I get to all the questions that you
Yeah.
have, which I share, but
Yeah.
I sort of back it up to the beginning of the origins of all this. And
Mhm.
I need an explanation.
Yeah, and so the other, so I actually started where, with what you just said, John, and it seemed to me the only authority the Board of Selectmen have is if that force majeure clause is invoked by TripAdvisor. So again, we're back to, if they forbear from doing that, how are we entering into this agreement without town meeting vote? Like, there are all kinds of questions about this. Yeah.
So I have a lot of questions. I'm gonna try to narrow it down. So I've heard what everybody said. I think I've learned a little bit here. So if I try to peel away when
Mhm.
beyond John's concern, which is mine as well, going to this agreement. So they didn't have 700 people working here. And so that's a breach of contract. We are saying we're okay with that breach as long as we give them, they get to pay $18,000 less if they're in breach.
They continue that, they
The benefit of the $18,000 discount.
continue to get the benefit of the tip.
The
They get an
economic
$18,000 discount. Mhm.
Okay. And
In
And for
exchange
that-
for that,
They're gonna pay.
they're gonna give us, we can go and use their
Cafeteria.
cafeteria, we can use their lobby. We're gonna get a scholarship program, and we're gonna be able to listen to some nice speakers.
And if we did nothing and said they weren't in breach, that we're okay with them, then what would happen? There'd
Well, there's
be-
probably a non-waiver clause somewhere, that basically we can, I'm sorry to be, there's too many
Mhm.
lawyers, we gotta
There are
kill all
too
the
many
lawyers.
lawyers.
But we can, parties can waive any term and condition if they wanna do it,
So if
and it's, but it doesn't mean that we're waiving it.
for
In the
2 years.
future.
Right.
If we waive it for this time period,
Mhm.
then we end up, the TIF is just as it was always.
Correct,
Correct.
but I think that's what Dave is
And-
saying,
and
is that
what's-
many communities are not dealing it with like we're trying to deal with it.
Correct.
They're just letting it go. Other communities are just letting it go.
So
So effectively waiving, is what you're saying.
Although you never wanna put that in
So I
writing,
guess
nor on the
that's-
record.
the benefit we're getting from this is a $25,000 in scholarships. Is there any other benefit the town is getting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The cafeteria
Use the-
and
yeah.
the
Use their empty building.
leadership training.
4 times a year.
There's consideration and the valuable consideration is, of course, the scholarships.
Which, if they can afford $25,000, it should really, I mean, I don't see why. So this, I know it's a small amount of money. This is the principle. Why should the taxpayers be foregoing the taxes and instead it should go to a private scholarship fund? And then, I don't know if any of you are on TripAdvisor's mailing list, because I am. They're donating all kinds of money from their foundation for all kinds of good causes. So they could, I mean, that, it, you know, I just got that last weekend. I don't know.
So, right, I mean, the way I boil it down, sort of to Tom, is that, you know, two of the things we negotiated is, one, they were gonna have the jobs, and two, they were gonna pay the taxes. So they don't have the jobs, and that's what it is. Why would I ever excuse them not paying the taxes? And that's where I end up.
The whole benefit of not paying the taxes is that the jobs and the milling around and coming into our downtown and
And they
spending
didn't
money.
do that, so why would I ever, and I'm just using me personally,
Yeah, yeah.
why would I ever excuse them from their tax obligation?
So aren't we getting hit twice then? Because they weren't milling around in all the
Right.
towns, all that other
Right,
taxes,
it's
revenue
just-
and
Right.
revenue from our
It's
small
illogical.
businesses.
But they're
Yeah.
really trying to do the forbearance agreement. It seems like it's focused on the fact that they're never going to get they're never gonna get back to 700 employees.
Okay, but.
Right.
We need to understand that. If that's the case.
That might be the case, but, you know, it's up to us to decide if we
Yeah.
want to try to enforce that or not. And that's our decision, but why would we ever give up taxes?
Yeah,
It makes zero sense to me, personally. at least.
Well, especially since we have so many capital projects on the table. I mean, what,
Or elderly people who can't afford the taxes. I mean,
Well, think
that's
about it
just-
this way, if circumstances have changed since they did this, and they came back to us and said, let's write a new agreement, right, going forward, would we even consider a new agreement of any kind going forward to give a tax break in return for?
but we
XYZ?
might.
I wasn't
Yeah.
in support of it in 2012, which was my last month or two on the. Board
Well,
of
that's,
Selectmen.
I'm not asking if what you thought then, I'm
I
asking
I
today.
feel the
Right.
same way.
But
Well,
why
today
would-
I would feel differently today than I did then, personally, but,
Right, but that's the question.
right,
Right.
exactly. No, that's my point. So I'm not sure. I mean, we can make, anyway.
And the whole thing is, I think by couching it as a forbearance of this and a forbearance of that, they're trying to avoid going to town meeting.
Maybe.
So where do we go from here on this? I guess, do we?
I think
ask
the
for-
chair and vice chair should have a nice little chat with the chair, vice chair.
tomorrow morning, we're having one.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah.
And I think we
And then
should,
report back.
I think we should also
Sorry.
write a memo expressing, summarizing the discussion tonight.
And I think also like just, again, principle. You know, real estate companies allow uses of their conference rooms all the time. And if real estate business is bad, like, we're not going to give a tax break to businesses because economy is bad. I think it has to be something that's rational. We have to understand it. It has to be rational and it has to be voted by more than, well, I don't even think this was discussed by the board of selectmen.
Well, it was on the consent agenda. That's
Right, so it
typically
wasn't
not
even discussed.
It couldn't have been.
Right,
That
it
would've
wasn't
been an
even
open
discussed,
meeting
but I think it
violation.
would then have to be something that is discussed.
Um,
And I think Carol's sympathetic to this and I am too. I mean, the travel industry's been a mess.
Yeah.
I
But
get
it
it.
was booming.
But you know what
last
else has
year.
been a mess? Restaurant industry,
Yeah.
and the theater industry, and the candlepin bowling industry. There's a lot of industries that have been hit very,
Is that an industry?
oh, yes, big. Oh, candlepins. Oh, Stacia Zerniak, one of the great bowlers. What?
You're in a rush to go eat. You're like.
Don Gillis.
Candlepins for cash, Bob, give me a baby.
But we did actually
I mean, I
support
guess-
the local business.
The question is, what is the
Right.
We
advantage
did.
to the town of Needham to do
And
this?
that's,
Right.
I'm
And
not
that
sure
that was
there is.
another point.
yeah,
Some of the ARPA funds
Yes.
can be used for lost revenue. So if we would have expected because there is a breach of contract, this $18,000 or so, we could use the ARPA funds to reimburse ourselves essentially for that
Mhm.
lost revenue. is my
Right.
And
understanding.
Rick already asked about the PP,
Yeah.
Yeah.
PPP.
I mean, what,
I'd be curious,
so.
because I'm sure
you know,
I'm sure they used it, and I'm sure they got it.
Don't want to throw out the other gate. Make sure you correct that in the minutes.
Did the town initiate this conversation?
We have no idea.
That would be the interesting thing to know, how this came up.
Last step tomorrow.
Yeah, I like the idea of you guys talking tomorrow and then putting together a memo. See what that goes.
Okay. Thank you for the discussion.
Well, thanks for finding this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Eagle eye, Josh.
Thank you.
But
Next,
I focused on the sale of blue on Highland in the agenda. Transfer the,
I did notice
154
that.
page.
I know.
transfer of the liquor license.
yeah,
60
very
pages.
detailed. Okay, so the next item is discussion and vote of the final operating, proposed operating budget for fiscal year 2023. There are a couple things we should discuss. First is a clerical error between lines 7 and 8. So on, I believe $6,215. When we voted our draft budget, actually should have been moved from line 7 to line item 8, workers' compensation versus injury on duty. So that the workers' compensation reads $732,070 and injury on duty reads $151,105. There a motion?
So moved.
Second,
Any discussion? So we'll vote. Dick,
I,
please.
Yes.
Rick,
yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. Second thing I want to bring up, I discussed this before, but I just want to give it one more try. So blue tree lighting was something that was funded through private monies for many, many years. Correct. And we have a Needham Community Council line, Needham Council of Arts and Culture line, which is cultural, like part of their mission is cultural. So it seems to fit well in there. Currently, it's being funded through the town manager's office, which is the executive branch of government. The blue tree lighting is also in part a religious, it has religious connotations. Is it right being there? My preference would be to see that money be in NCAC.
What?
No,
Where are we? What?
We're moving money for the tree lighting.
What
Josh,
type of religious connotations?
You may be accurate,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure it's, in my mind, it's a significant change that if the town manager wants it in her budget, I'm okay.
and she has expressed that it's.
What are religious
It's
connotations?
easier for them to manage if it's in there.
Okay.
Did I hear that?
Santa Claus.
There you go.
Ho, ho, ho. What,
I may be overly sensitive about this.
to what? The lighting of a tree?
Well,
Do you boycott it?
no, What? No. No, I mean,
It's
that-
blue, so they've made some concession.
no, so. for instance- No,
I don't see any red lights.
no, I mean, there's even a Supreme Court
We're not-
case right
We're
now
not regulating
pending,
this down.
talking about the flagpole in front of Boston City Hall, because there was a case about
Well,
whether
that's-
religious symbols could go there.
Yes, got it.
So it's not, I mean, it may seem kind of.
Josh, I'm very sensitive. I am very sensitive to what you're saying, but I actually think it's more of an economic issue, bringing people to town to shop in the stores.
Right, exactly.
That's how I.
I'm not opposed to it at all. I think
understand.
it should continue. This is just,
I understand.
You just
So
would like
what
it
is
in
the
a different
request?
budget
What is
line.
the suggestion?
the suggestion was that $8,000 be moved from line item 11B to line item 31. If the committee disagrees with me, I'm happy to move on.
I'm
31 is
I'm
what?
just saying, it's not necessarily right or wrong, neither place the town manager wants it in
Right.
her department and they
But she
seem
controls
to
the other
manage it.
budget too. huh?
So it's-
She would have to ask the committee to vote on it.
And some police details and such.
I think at this point, given the transfer of responsibility for this, I think this is a town event, and the town event should be run by the town manager. So I would not move it. I'd keep it. Well, is that where it is now?
It's currently there.
I would leave it there.
So I would add to that, it's, I'm a big believer in if something is going well and doesn't need to be fixed, why interfere? And it has been working well. And I just think there's some logistics, Josh, that having it be to a volunteer group might get lost in the shuffle, or might be difficult for them to do that when the town manager here has all the resources that are available to her to make sure the details are done, the paperwork's into the details, all those types of things. I just don't know why we would mess with it. Although philosophically, I don't disagree with the placement of it. I just don't think it's something that needs to be changed.
We're happy to step back from that then.
Can I say one other thing? I meant to say at the last meeting and I forgot to. And it's, when I was listening to the town manager talk about all the things that the Needham Business Association used to do and really is unable to do it as much as they used to. And what it brought to my mind is how much Louise Condon has meant to this community and what she has done for our town. And I mean, she was the Needham Business Association for many, many, many years. I understand there were a lot of people helping her, but she was the person out there in the front. So I just wanted to give a shout out to her. And what a great job, well done. Now, admittedly, the town now is taking over some of these responsibilities, but think about all that she did for us without having any town involvement. So I just wanted to give her a little congratulations and acknowledgement.
Well deserved, yeah. Thank you. The next discussion item I wanted to raise is the reserve fund. So in the draft budget, we voted $2,225,000. For last year and the year before, it was level funded at $2,077,091. It seems like we never appropriate nearly that amount, and we could leave it level funded. I wanted to
I'm
raise that.
all in favor of that.
Well, but the question I asked last year, I'll ask again. What then happens to that money?
It doesn't get raised from the levy.
Exactly, we don't tax it.
We don't tax people for money we're not gonna spend.
And I asked that question to Dave last year, so I'll ask it again. Is that what's gonna happen?
Yeah, that's correct, because it's the way the article is written.
Okay. Well, then, so then that
Why do we
begs.
have like a round number? I'm just curious.
Yeah, why is it not
Like 2
2
million.
million even,
Yeah,
right,
Well, but that
2 million
begs-
even.
But that begs the question then. So if it's not 2,225, and if it's not 277, then really what should it be?
2 million,
But
just an
based
even
on what?
number.
But well,
It's just a reserve. It's a reserve.
no, I
dollar.
understand, but if the desire is to not raise monies within the levy that would cover that,
Mhm.
then shouldn't we look and see what the historical use of the fund was?
Well, wait a
I
minute,
think,
it's snowing tonight, so it could dramatically change our need for.
Well, so, I mean, I think snow and ice was about $900,000 as of a couple, like last month. I don't know if we're gonna double that by the end of the year, but
No, but other things come up.
Yeah.
Right, so-
So,
They're usually
so
relatively. minor.
what is our budget? $200 million? Yeah, so that would be 1%.
Right,
That's a 1%.
maybe, is that how the number comes? Is it a
Yeah.
percentage of the
No,
overall? budget?
Dick, go ahead.
Dick,
The big variable is the snow and ice hit. And you can push that. You don't have to spend that in the current year. You can, so there is flexibility. So we don't need to anticipate everything
I
under the
forgot
sun.
about that. That's a good point.
So the other time I recall us using, so there were a couple of other times that I recall us using it. One, legal fees.
Right.
And then in 2010, when we had those storms, those rainstorms, we needed reserve
Usually
funds.
nature driven
Yeah.
issues.
That's really what the reserve fund is for.
So Louise, wouldn't it be helpful to see what our
Yeah. the
average has
history.
been over the past 12 years? And maybe that should be what guides us.
I mean, we have a formula to calculate this value, but I think it sounds like this formula yields values that may be larger than necessary. So we
At
could-
this point.
Yeah. So absent a new formula, I guess my suggestion is level funding.
I'm happy to agree to that.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that.
We need a motion or
Yes, please.
a motion to amend line item 10 from $2,225,913 to level fund from the current year of $2,077,091.
A second.
Any further discussion? We'll vote. Dick?
Yes,
before we do, I'm just curious, do we want to develop some sort of process in going forward for coming up, somewhat formulaic for coming up with this number?
Mhm.
I don't think we have to do
Do it right now.
do it right
Yeah.
now, but commit to coming up with a process.
Well, maybe it should be handled like all the budget line items, and there should be a liaison working with Dave on what the
Yeah.
reserve fund should be on an annual basis.
Well,
It's our
we are,
reserve
it's
fund.
townwide
Yeah,
expenses.
Well, I and it's know, also but we our always do it reserve at the fund.
We always do it at the very end to see what.
Right.
Yeah,
It's
that's-
ours.
The finance committee, yes.
The finance
Mhm.
committee asked for that.
Yeah.
So you can work with Louise.
But yeah, I think Barry, you're correct.
Anyway, I'm sorry. So we'll start.
So we'll vote, Dick.
It's a vote.
This is the vote, yes.
Yes,
The level fund.
yes,
Please,
Yes,
Rick,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. The next question, and I think we alluded to this earlier, is funding sources. So as it's currently printed in the draft warrant, there's $2,625,000 proposed to be fund the operating budget through free cash. There's a lot of free cash this year, and we tend to have guidance that no more than 2% of the budget be funded through free cash, which would be a little over $4 million. Did we want to adjust that? It seems like we have the capacity to go higher. And the effect of using more free cash here would be to lower the tax burden. So we have to tax the residents less for the operating budget.
It's 2% of the prior year.
Prior years, thank you for that clarification.
so if you don't mind, I don't even agree that 2% of the prior year is the right amount. I would like ultimately for the town to not rely on free cash for the operating budget, and that we look at how we levy taxes. I mean, this is part of a bigger discussion for me. But I think that increasing reliance on free cash is always dangerous because it tends to fluctuate. Here, we're not talking about big numbers in terms of what we have seen free cash, but philosophically, for me, it's a question,
Yeah,
big one.
I guess to the extent that we have a lot of free cash, I think it should be used. I think saving up free cash as an extra sort of reserve fund is not necessarily productive. I think we should find uses for it. We don't want to be reliant on the budget, on those funds in the budget. So there has to be a long-term discussion, but for the short term right now, given that we have funds, that's what I'm thinking. Why not spend more on free cash?
Well, I don't necessarily agree with everything that's been said. I don't think there's anything, there is going to be free cash. You're never going to get to a point. And frankly, you don't want to get to a
Right.
point where there's not free cash. Because then you're at a point where you wouldn't be able to make your operating budget. So historically, back in my prior life, there'd be a certain formula that would be used, and we would come up with what we believe to be recurring funds within free cash, and we would be able to say, we know that this amount of money is always going to become available when the free cash is certified. And so we're going to use that for the operating budget, which to me, it makes sense. I don't know what that amount is because I don't have all the facts and figures. And then for the percentage of the free cash that's certified that is not necessarily recurring or which may go up and down, that's what you should use for cash capital. I believe in that principle. I think that's a sound financial tool and it makes sense. I don't know what the numbers are. I don't know how it all shakes out. And I'm happy to have the discussion. I also would like to know that if we're going to have a discussion about using free cash dollars, I would like to see a comprehensive chart of where do we propose using it and what other options might there be for us to discuss. So I don't necessarily want to say, let's use free cash for this without knowing what the impact might be for other potential uses.
So,
Mhm.
go ahead.
Do we, historically, I know it's a relatively short history, I've been involved, has always been a meaningful amount of free cash, but I gotta believe there have been times when there hasn't been, and why would that
That was a
Well-
long time ago. So the free cash
My-
usage policy was it in 2000? and
My
maybe
point is,
11?
what are the risks of-
So-
I don't necessarily
Yeah.
disagree with
I
you.
remember that.
I don't necessarily disagree with you, Louise, actually, about use it at all
Yeah.
for recurring items, but I look at this as,
Mhm. So the way the policy was written was that we would take the turn back from the prior year departmental operating budgets, not to exceed 2% of that year's budget,
Or the actual turn back.
or the
whichever
actual
is
turn back,
lower.
whichever one, exactly, whichever one was lower, because that's all that we considered to be recurring.
right,
And that was at a time when we had a hard time keeping within the 2.5%, a really hard time. So we had to rely on that free cash.
To your question earlier, I think there's always cash capital, which is a big, always relies heavily on free cash. I think this year, another item would be Emery Grover. I think there's an effort to use a lot of the free cash on that.
I have no desire to use free cash for Emery Grover capital, major capital construction, none at all. But I would like to, consider other possibilities. That's just my one opinion. But I'd like, we need to have a comprehensive discussion about what opportunities are there, and then we can make an intelligent vote as to where we recommend it being spent.
we just came back to what I think part of this is due to Dave's conservative projections as to why we end up, hopefully Dave is here for another 50 years, but, we can't necessarily rely. This policy's got to outlive all of us, right, and how we do things. And I think we've been the benefit of some pretty prudent and conservative projections and as to how we get to a meaningful amount of free cash every year. And I guess I'm not sure that's something we should hang our hat on, or is there something just in the makeup that I'm not?
We're raising too much money. Well, that's what we're doing.
No, but part of it's projections, right? It's.
Yeah,
Well, no, the free cash is not, I'm sorry, Dick,
Go ahead, Dick.
Go ahead, Dick.
It's essentially turnbacks from people not being able to hire all the people that we built into the budget. That's what the source of it is primarily. And there's, and there's also some increased revenue, and we have
Right.
conservative estimates on the revenue side. And the excise tax comes in more and other taxes come in higher.
So Dave, I'm just curious if you had to do a pie chart as to sources of free cash, how would it break down? Just roughly.
Generally, the last few years been an exception. It's generally been about 50% from revenue and 50%
Okay.
from
Well,
expenditures
that's
coming in
That's
lower.
helpful.
The free cash numbers have been higher because we've deliberately not been spending all the free cash. For instance, this year's free cash at 16 million included 5.6 million that wasn't spent last year. So if we had spent that 5.6 last year, not returning, the free cash for this year would have been less than the prior year. So we had several years where there was a greater amount of free cash in consideration of COVID-19 and other uncertainties. We wanted to maintain a greater deal of flexibility because although we did get monies from the federal government and the state government to help address COVID costs, there was no certainty that that was going to happen. And we have to try to be as self-reliant as possible.
Which I think made sense. Conservative and very fair.
Are we ever concerned? I'm sure we must be, that so much is turned back at the end of a fiscal year by either low cost of expenses or maybe a little padding on departments' budgets? Because that impacts this, right?
Yes, well, we look at if there are patterns and try to understand why there are turnbacks. That's one of the things I actually look at it every single year when I have to write up my discussion and analysis for the audit. And exceptional turnbacks tend to be unique circumstances that happen, like the ability to hire people to fill positions that were vacant for a longer time. That usually contributes, particularly in public safety, when that happens. The wild card is the wild cards is what the school turns back. Last year, the school department gave back one of the larger dollar amounts that it's contributed than it has in a number of years, because they tend to spend pretty much all the budget, but in part for those federal and state funds I mentioned that help the school department meet a lot of its COVID expenses and was able to turn back a greater amount in 21. And flexibility and volatility in energy pricing and such. In fact, we're looking, well, I'm not telling any of you that what you don't already know, our energy costs are substantially higher than what our budget's built on this year and budget we're going into 23 with, and hopefully the market settles down by 20.
I'm thinking the numbers we used for diesel fuel and gasoline, and it's nowhere near what we're gonna end up paying. I'm wondering if it would make sense, it's too late this year, but would it make sense when we go to do this next year and a department brings their expected spending, could we have in front of us what they actually have given back over the past couple of years? Because it does two things. Number one, it kind of makes us look at the real number. And number two, it plays off what you're trying to do in terms of budget, which you actually need. And it kind of ties that together. And it makes sense.
The audited financials actually have a very good
that,
exhibit.
yeah.
that Does exactly that.
Those, and last year's isn't even available yet, right?
No, you'll see it in a few more weeks. I was just finishing it up today, actually.
Awesome.
Okay. Because I'm sure I'm going to use the word,
Bill, you have that information in.
Yeah.
It's provided to you. You know what they actually spent, you know what the budgets are.
right, yeah, I just
Yep.
told it myself and can do that, yeah. I'm just wondering how much of that, I'm gonna use the word fluff, and
Yeah.
I don't know it's the wrong word to use, I know, because I don't mean it to be
Louise
pejorative.
didn't hear fluff.
Change, make it sound better. But it's kind of curious how much of that is actually here. So when we go to talk about free cash next year, how much of that discussion is played in here? Just a
Well, and it
add to
also,
this esoteric
I
conversation.
think in many of our budget discussions, every year,
Mm.
there's, well, we tried out this program because it wasn't built into our budget, but we had extra cash because we didn't hire Y, or we didn't go to conferences. So there's also that
Right.
part of it.
Which is not turned back with a new.
Well, it's,
New program, exactly. I know.
I mean, they're turning back less.
Yeah.
So,
Although I suspect just anecdotally that percentage overall is probably
Yeah.
small. Yeah, but it'd be worthwhile to see.
And Dave, am I correct? At some point, I think I saw that the free cash being recommended for the operating budget was higher, 3.2 million at one point.
In terms of all types of operating expenses, when I look at not, it's not a target to get to there. So that like what Ms. Miller was saying is you would not want to, the policy been working, you'd never want more than 2% of the prior year's department turned back to be funding recurring expenses. Ideally, you wouldn't want to use any non-recurring monies to fund recurring expenses.
Oh, no, but I'm saying currently, the 2,625,000 that's in the warrant. I remember seeing a higher number, 3.2 million.
Yes, but there's also other expenses that are being funded by the tax levy as well. Or that would be a recurring in nature.
In other warrant articles.
In other ones.
Yes, I understand. Okay. So sounds like there's no desire to change that value right now for the funding sources.
Well, I would still like to see what I asked for, which is if we think that there is an opportunity to potentially recommend appropriation of free cash to other areas, I'm happy to have that discussion.
So, I mean, some of them are in the warrant. So for instance, some of the articles we've already voted
No,
on.
I got that. I saw there were 2 or 3, but I'd like,
Yeah,
maybe we could have just a chart of them.
we can, but in terms of voting the final budget tonight.
Right
It's
now,
not
we're just focused on what's been allocated to the budget,
exactly.
not to other capital items. The recurring part of free cash, that's the part that we're gonna dedicate to.
What do you want, Josh? What are you looking for?
We need a final vote on the budget tonight.
Okay, so
And so,
It's just our draft budget.
no, this is a
Yeah.
final.
Oh, this is the March
This is the
15th
final.
But
budget.
is it, I guess the question is it the budget only what we're spending, or is it?
The funding sources.
The funding sources for the.
It includes the funding sources.
Okay.
And so that's why I wanted to bring it up. I think this would be the time to discuss.
I'm not prepared to advocate for or against any other change of use of free cash, because I don't believe I've been fully informed.
Dick, go ahead.
This approving the budget wouldn't foreclose a decision. Let's assume there's another $1 million of free cash. We could vote later to recommend that that be included in some of these reserve accounts as an item to be voted on at the annual meeting or the special meeting, unless the warrants are all closed.
Yeah, in terms of this article, though, I mean, I think,
But I'm just taking up Jim's point. Voting on this doesn't foreclose that other issue of allocating free cash to other activities.
no, to other activities, but it kind of forecloses
Yes.
mostly changing the sources to this article.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so it sounds like I have no other discussion items for the budget. Did anyone else want to bring anything up?
But you're still looking for a vote.
Yes, so subject to the prior changes we've made, is there a motion to approve the final proposed fiscal year 2023 budget?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? We'll vote. Dick,
Yes.
please.
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes.
Through 205 million.
Well, we lowered it.
Approximately.
We lowered it
Right.
because of the reserve fund, but you're right, it's 200.
Oh, awesome.
So, large number. Next item was just an update on the school master plan joint meeting. So we had a joint meeting with the school committee, the select board, the PPDC. Not all members of all committees were there, but it was just a discussion about the master plan extension. We've discussed among this group. There's been separate discussions with the school committee and with the PPDC. One of the main things that I just asked, and I said, I think, well, the school committee said that there's no plan to submit a proposal to the MSBA this cycle, which would close in April. Instead, they're waiting until next cycle. And so I asked, before taking any of the 4 options off the table, perhaps we should wait until we have the facility financing plan, understand what the debt burden would be among those 4 options. As fact finding, to make sure we have all the facts before making any changes. It sounds like that was an area of contention.
Well, they want to take a couple options off before we're gonna have planned.
Right.
Well, the school committee, yeah, they
Yeah.
indicated that they want to take 1 to 2 options off the table.
I raised the option to them after the meeting was over, and I probably should have talked to you first, David. But with your oversight and guidance, instead of taking plans off, outsource the number crunching that you would oversee. And so you wouldn't be forced to have to do all of the plans. They would be done. And so we could see exactly what the numbers are. So no plans would be taken off the table. So we could talk about apples and apples. And they were going to take that up. So I'm not worried. So since you know anything about it, it probably died on the floor that night. But I think it makes sense, because just to take off stuff without understanding the numbers doesn't make sense to me. And granted, doing 4 plans is a heck of a lot of work. But if we outsourced it and we oversaw it, we could have everything in real time.
Who are we outsourcing it to?
So I actually had called Josh this weekend because I think we need to run some numbers. I'm not proposing doing the detailed analysis that Dave does, but I did speak with Josh and then I spoke with Louise. I think we can come up with a pretty good approximation
That's
on
all
our
we-
own, running different scenarios, and that's all that we need
Right.
for our purposes. It's not, and I know I had asked you to look at some tools, which I think are pretty simple to
It's
use.
very simple, but
Yeah. And now we just need to figure out what the scenarios are and then
it's just
talk.
not a lump sum you can plug in though.
No,
that-
there
that-
isn't. Right, right. I mean, it's gonna take time, but.
With all due respect, if we do that,
Mhm.
our number may indicate one plan, and the school committee may have taken that plan off the table.
But that's irrelevant, I think, to the finance committee.
But should we do some of that in concert, so we're all speaking the same language? Because
So,
we'll run into the same issue as we did with Emery Grover if we do it differently and not together. Just one man's opinion, but I don't want to get to the days before town meeting and end up the same place we were with Emery Grover. That made no sense. And to do that again even makes less sense. So I'm kind of curious, should we be doing this together?
so I think, so what I was envisioning was figuring out exactly kind of like what is quote unquote affordable. So if you're assuming that debt service is at 10%, what does that tell you? And then what can you program into it? If it's at 11%, if it's at 12% for a certain period of time. Because I think that for me, that's what's missing from the discussion.
Right.
We're just going around in circles as to what people like, don't like, and what order it should be. It's like, but
Right? I don't.
we
I'm
don't
not-
even know what we can
Yeah, I'm not
afford.
disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
But somehow we should do it in unison, so we're all looking at the same number.
And I want to make sure that's not duplicative of what Dave is
Dave's.
already doing.
Is it?
You've seen from my prior work what I provide based upon the borrowing interest rate assumptions, project spend lines, and the projects that are under consideration in the tax impact of those, if they're excluded debt.
Could you have time to do all four?
So I can do as many as the community wants me to do. It just takes that much longer, but yes, I can do as many as the community
Well,
wants.
to
done.
me, if there were 80 options, it would not be right to run it on 80
No.
options. But I think if there's 4, I think that it should be run on those 4. And when I hear that, they're not making, no submission is being made for this April, then there's not a time crunch per se to allow those 4 to take place. But I just don't know how you would decide which 2 to take off the table without having the same information on all 4 fiscally, as opposed to what you like or didn't like. I like green, I like blue, I like this. So I think if there are 4 options, then each of those should be pulled through to the financial analysis so that they're all on the table to be looked at and poked and discussed and considered.
So if I might, so if we're going to be taking on a construction project, we actually first have to know what we can afford. Like I know that there are 4 options out there. If we can't afford any of them, we need to know that.
Right.
Like, to me, that's like the first fundamental question
I totally agree.
is what can, does this even make sense? Why are we even talking about it?
Right.
If it does, great.
Or if it doesn't make sense, then we have to come up with
A
a
plan
plan to
that
make
does.
it make
Right,
sense,
exactly.
and which may mean, taking money from other places, right? So we're
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
other sacrifices that need to be made.
Yeah.
But not without knowing what the financial implications of any of these are. I mean, we're just we know there's a need, but the need has to fit into the boxes that we have.
I think you arrive at that by having the four
Right.
options run.
Yep.
And then you see each of these four options, or maybe some of them or none of them, go beyond, will take us beyond our limitations in the years in which they do. So you have, I think that gives you something concrete to run through, as opposed to hypothetically just saying in fiscal year 2028, we can afford, debt of this. Well,
But I
what
think
would
that
go
helps,
to?
but I think that helps you narrow it down.
Yeah.
Because if you can afford $200 million worth of projects, so now let's figure out if we can do, how can we do this with $200 million? Or if we can afford,
But it's all layered in.
what do you mean?
It's layered in over years.
Yeah, but you can run that on an approximation.
Right.
But you don't need an approximation. You can run it based on the
So, but I guess what I'm saying is it has to be divorced from a specific discussion about specific options.
why.
Because I actually don't think that those are necessarily going to be the options.
Then that'll be the conclusion. Right. That'll be the conclusion. But I mean, just to make up block numbers. I mean, even in the old days when Dave would do that and he'd have imaginary project number 4, whatever it was, we always knew what imaginary project was. It was the DPW building or whatever it was. And we just wouldn't put a name on it.
Whatever, but.
So it's the same, but it's the same
thing.
idea.
It's the
It is
same idea.
exactly.
It's exactly the same idea.
We're talking
Yeah.
about the same thing.
No,
Yeah.
but my point is, we don't need to make it up. They're giving us scenarios, 4
Correct.
different scenarios.
And that's what we're talking about.
No, that's what I would run.
Exactly.
Well, that's not what Louise is saying.
No, it isn't. Yes, it is.
No, it's
A-
not.
And that
It
will
is.
tell you at
No, it's
12%,
not.
you can't do X projects.
She's only focusing on those 4 scenarios in terms of this is what the options are. Let's see if we can under our current
I
fiscal
don't-
guidance, can we afford
I'm
any of
pretty
them?
good at hearing. It's not what was
Hey.
being said, but I don't, it's
You
fine.
run the
If-
financial model and you see what fits into it.
If
What you know, there's the difference. And you see what fits into it. No. I'm suggesting we run the financial model
So we can
based
do
on
it-
what is before us.
So we have the 4 options before us.
Yeah.
I think it would be very helpful to know what the impact of those 4 options are, because I think we're past talking in the abstract. I think,
Right, we can't talk in the abstract.
We need to
anymore.
talk
We're
about
going to run in
concrete options.
in circles.
and these are the 4 options that are before us right now. Perhaps they could be tweaked at some point later on. There may be some variations to them, which were discussed at the meeting last week.
And I think that that's what this exercise will do. It'll tell you what are potential variations.
And then if someone gonna talk to the school committee and say, we're putting numbers to all of your 4. So when they pull off 2, and one of ours is better than the ones they pulled off, it's gonna end up in a heap. So should we not talk to them and say, this is the methodology we've chosen, as good as it is, and not have a confrontation of them being here, us being there?
So I don't want to use a completely new methodology. I mean, I kind of like Dave's
Yeah.
methodology.
No, so
So
am
looking
I.
at 4
Um,
options. If-
Maybe I'm not speaking clearly. All I'm suggesting is school committee is intent on taking 4 and making it 2. If we're gonna do the numbers on all 4, shouldn't we tell them
Yes.
that so they know
Yes.
and not take it off until they see the number?
Yes,
Yes.
Because if they take off 1 and that's the ones our number shows good on, it's gonna be
Correct.
I won't use the words.
At the same time, I mean, I understand what Louise wants to do, I think, is understand what our spending capacity is
Yeah.
in
Right.
general. And that's kind of parallel to what Dave is doing.
Correct.
So I don't think it would be duplicative. I think it would be understanding, it would be a bit more abstract. But if any of these 4 options are not doable, then it would give
It would tell you that.
a range of what is doable.
Correct. And I mean, Dave went through this
Without
exercise.
stating a preference.
Right.
For an
Dave went
option.
through this exercise already when we started way back.
Right, then we should do that.
So
we should do
I
your
actually
stuff
don't think
quickly.
that Dave has been instructed to do this. I don't think we can instruct him to do this.
That's not true. That is not true. I can bring out the charter. We have the right to ask for any information from any town employee.
But it
this is
doesn't
information
exist.
that doesn't
It
exist.
doesn't exist.
We're
These are
asking him to
projections.
create it. Well, then what do you want to do, Louise? Have someone volunteer to do it?
I already did. To work,
So-
I think
so-
we can work on this. We used to do this. We used to run our models once upon a time.
So if Dave, I understand that you're working on the 4. I'm very comfortable. I don't want to disrupt your
That's
work on
fine.
that. I think if Louise wants to explore in the
I
abstract.
just,
some other
so no,
things.
what I want is to actually get to an answer. I don't want us to continue doing this for months and months
Jacob
where
also has his hand. up.
we're not getting numbers. We're just talking and not getting anywhere.
Dick, go ahead.
What assumptions are we making about other capital projects in this context?
That's what we know.
DPW potentially.
Yeah,
And then the water and sewer projects that we're aware of. plus the
don't those have to
projects
be
that are-
factored into Louise's issue of what can we afford?
Kind of.
Kind of, but it's a
No,
much,
that's definitely.
it's a much broader, it's just an approximation.
So
But whatever, I'm good not doing anything. Makes no difference to me.
I
You
think
know,
the summary
I
is
just
that
don't think we're gonna get anywhere in the next couple months.
I think
honestly.
the summary is that the finance committee wants to wait for the 4 financing of the 4 options that are currently on the table before excluding any.
I certainly feel that way.
Yeah, why would we have been provided with 4 options and someone, summarily dismissed 2 of them?
Well, and in fact, I think that that was the purpose of the reserve fund transfer that we approved. I think that's stated in the document that it's to understand the financial impact of the 4. Okay, so we can communicate that. Dick, to give something.
Has everyone seen the materials that were handed out last week? Because one of the flow charts purports to show the cost of the different options. And there are 3 options on the table, but there's a $70 million differential
Right.
in
Right.
projected costs, which didn't seem to cut any weight with anybody at the meeting the other night.
I think part of the costs, you're talking about the 2 options where Mitchell would go first compared to the options where Pollard would go first.
Richard priority or Pollard priority.
Yeah.
Bottom line, you've got 391 million, 392 million, and call it 320 million.
So that was brought up, actually. I think part of the, so I think the select board is looking at those bottom line numbers to understand that they're looking at the overall cost over time and trying to minimize that. I think what the finance committee is trying to do is look at the debt burden on taxpayers within any given year. And so the difference that's not really shown in this is that if you do those Pollard first projects, the timeline is much compressed. So even though the total may be less, you're spending much more in any given year.
Yeah. But the point we were talking about the other night was we should know how much we're spending in a year. It may, $70 million is a lot of savings. You shouldn't just, we ought to understand why that's not a good choice.
Right, which is why I think having the financing plan to compare across these options is helpful. Okay, so we'll communicate that. Anything else? Did you want to come back to this athletic facility improvement fund?
I'd like to, at what point is it on March 23 that we're going to get CPC discussions?
Correct.
Dave, can you ask whoever's doing the CPC in particular about Chambers Street? I'd like to have information that talks about the entire plan, whether there's federal funding, state funding, town funding. I don't just want someone to come in and say, I want to give X amount of dollars out of town funds. I want to know what is the big picture? What's the big plan?
Yes, I will pass that on. The chair, the CPC, did touch upon on some of those topics, not in great detail, and I think in part because I think some of the preliminary money they're looking for is to give them the better answers. But they are looking at monies from And there was that acronym of agencies that they
Right,
referenced.
which is fine, and it may be almost like we spend money for design or feasibility, whatever, I get all that, but I'd at least like to know what the potential big picture is.
Yes, I think they're prepared to come and talk about that.
Okay.
Right, so Article 39, which we deferred from earlier, would be appropriate to the athletic facility improvement fund. We didn't make any changes in.
I think we wanted to know if we were going to put any more
Right,
out of free cash into that,
correct.
which is the reason why I didn't want to vote the free cash number, but we had to vote it for the budget, so I don't know what you want to do. What's your preference, Mr. Chair?
I think we can take a position on this now, or we can defer this to later.
I thought we said we didn't want to take a
Right.
position now because we didn't want to have to amend it later. That's what we said, no?
Yes,
So
it may change.
the only thing my understanding is that people had questions about is whether it should be appropriate from the tax levy or from free cash.
No,
No,
there
we
is,
were
it
gonna-
comes
From
from
both.
It
both.
should be larger with some of the free
Yeah.
cash going into it.
More money.
Part of it is, this part is always gonna come from
Tax
budget,
levy.
tax levy.
There was a
And,
question
and
if you
then,
wanted to
and
throw more in
then there may be more for this article that will come from free cash. So.
Okay.
It'd be like any other warrant article that has multiple sources. We just don't know the additional sources.
Okay, I'm sorry. So is the desire to wait until all discussions of free cash have been other articles?
Well,
have
when
been
we know
discussed?
what the final number is, that's gonna be appropriated for this purpose.
Okay, and the remainder, okay, I understand. So we'll talk about this later, and we have until the end of March.
Yeah.
to vote. So we'll talk about that later.
Sometimes.
No updates. The next meetings are scheduled for March 23rd and 30th. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion adjourned. Second.
We'll take a vote. Dick,
Yes.
please.
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Yes,
Barry, and the chair votes yes.
I do not think I can do it the 23rd.
Yeah, I won't be here the 23rd.